What is going on? Thank you for entering the chamber once again. Today we're going to be taking a look at one of the new previews that just came out from the League of Villainy preview stream that Jasko just put out. We're talking about none other than Shigaraki 3. As you can see right up here, Shigaraki 3 is a character that I feel is very promising, and as the leader of the League of Villains, it's exciting to see a character like this that plays around checks and manipulating his opponent, which is very fitting for Shigaraki because he's a big schemer. We haven't really gotten a character that plays off that particular gimmick. Since this is a new character, I'm going to briefly go over what the character does, and then we're going to go over kind of what I think its strengths and weaknesses are afterwards. And then to finish up, I'm going to talk about all of his symbols and a few cards that I would look at if I was going to play this character on each of those symbols as kind of like a start point for you. So first, let's talk about his opening enhance. Your rival makes a check against a difficulty of 5. If they fail, you draw a card. You're going to draw so many cards off this enhance, it is unreal. You get to do this every single time you attack and every single time your opponent attacks. I think on average you'll probably end up seeing somewhere in the ballpark of 10 to 11 cards with this character, which is just like a crazy hand size. Let's move on to his response. Once per turn, after your rival makes a check, it gets -1. Failing this check will not end the combat phase. We've seen a lot of effects like this already, primarily on the evil or order, usually evil and order symbols, where they can impose check hacks of some kind, and failing that check doesn't cause the combat phase to end. So I think Shigaraki will naturally kind of pair well with effects like these because you can stagger them out and constantly hit your opponent to really reduce the amount of checks that they make and force them to hopefully start like discarding cards. Between them letting cards go due to failing checks and Shigaraki having a giant hand size, I think we're going to really see like that's going to be this character's strength is the amount of card disparity he has between his opponent and himself, especially when he's playing against 6 and especially 5-handers. Finally, let's talk about his first form, which is a once per game action. You only get to do this once because it's really busted if you could keep doing it. It costs you a single momentum, and then until the start of your next turn, all of your rival's checks get -1. It's a very simple, very blanket effect. But this applies for a bunch of stuff. This means your attacks are basically at +1 speed. It means that your opponent's going to struggle to play long attack strings against you. It means that any checks you make them take, which again, Shigaraki as a character, this Shigaraki as a character is going to be full of checks and effects that make your opponent make checks to avoid negative status effects. So these abilities all become a little bit more impactful. I think this is like a really good character card. And let's talk about some of the pros and cons about this guy. First, I want to talk about just kind of like an unusual sort of gimmick that Shigaraki 3 has, where he's forcing your opponent to make checks constantly, but you don't really benefit from your opponent failing checks in any way, other than the effects of the cards themselves. Like, we don't have like an attack or a foundation or something that does something when your opponent fails a check for any reason. We just have cards that manipulate checks and occasionally will make your opponent make a check. So hopefully we'll see a card or two in his kit later that it punishes your opponent for missing checks without actually making them make a check, if that makes sense. Kind of a neat gimmick with this character. If you're going second, when your opponent's building foundations, if they ever check a 3, and it's their foundation they're playing is on a 3, which most of their foundations will be, you can actually use his response and shrink their check down to 2. Since their character's committed, they don't have a stage, they just lose that foundation. So building against Shigaraki 3 is actually very tough when you're going first. I think this is one of the things that's going to help kind of give him some defensive staying power, is being able to like snipe random foundations from your opponent's build. You can only do that once, but sometimes that's all you need. You know, if the Ojiro player checks a 3 on their student of the art and you make that 3 a 2 and they lose student, even if they have like a 5th foundation to build so they still build 4, they lose student of the art, so they're not killing you on turn 2. The other thing I think is very, very promising about this character is his card draw is absolutely off the chain. I talked about this earlier, but I mean, generally you're going to be in the ballpark of like 10 to 11 cards. So I think when you're building this character, you want to look for effects that require you to discard card for cost in some way, because discarding a card for a cost is just not punishing for a character like this when you're playing with realistically more cards than you can like play. Being able to like pitch things you don't need for effects that are powerful can really weaponize the incredible amount of card draw he has beyond just having good card selection. I'm going to talk about a couple options in some of his symbols as we go along. But as like an example, what I mean is just like a kind of generic option. If you play living up to his example with powerful and EX moves, and you can do this on any of his symbols, you don't get the draw off living up to his example because your character is a 7-hander, but that doesn't matter when you get to draw off every attack you play. Some of your actual attacks might give you card advantage, and you just really care about being able to get like free powerful EXs. Like, this is a good way to kind of weaponize the card advantage that he has without it like really being a negative. So I could totally see a couple copies of living up to his example in any deck that you're playing with this character. I think there's a lot of room to make something cool happen with that action. Now, unfortunately, every character has some cons to go with the pros, and I want to talk about a couple of the issues that I see with Shigaraki 3 that I think as a prospective player building and playing with this character, you're going to have to overcome. First, 19 health is very soft, and your only early game defense is hopefully clearing a foundation when they build turn 1. That is useful when they check a 3 on a foundation they're playing on a 3, being able to just like, no, you don't get that because now you checked a 2. Like, that is powerful, but beyond that, and basically reducing our opponent's check by 1, that's just like stun 1. Like, we don't really have a lot of defense in our face, so finding good defensive tools to survive with our 19 health, so we can go into the game to get some momentum and do our stuff, and really like manipulate our opponent down, is going to be important. He also has no stat modification of any kind, so we're playing a very honest game with this character. You know, we're not like really a big stat stick. Before we get into his symbols, I want to actually talk about another card that was previewed in a different post, or I should say in a different video, and that's League Intervention. I've got a cutout of the card here. It's not the best quality, but I'm going to read what it does, so that way we're all on the same page. We are talking about League Invitation. So, enhance. Commit. Your rival's next check this turn gets -2. Baseline, this is basically handing out +2 speed on a commit cost, which is actually a pretty good ability on a foundation, just for like pushing damage and pushing cards through. But this will also obviously have synergy with all of our effects that make our opponent makes checks. Fairly, this card can only be used on our turn. We can't use it to commit and disrupt our opponent, otherwise this foundation will be nuts. Its second ability, Flip. Your rival makes a check against a difficulty of 7. If they fail, you commit 1 rival foundation. Playable while committed. I think despite being a common, this is going to be a really good foundation, especially in Shiggy, since we're going to care so much about making our opponent make checks. Baseline, flipping a committed foundation to realistically stun our opponent for 2, since they're going to check a 5 and we're going to make them go to 6 and 7, so they don't lose like a key offensive piece. This is still just like flip for stun 2. That's very powerful, just on its own. In conjunction with its own ability, where they're checking against 9, this is commit, flip, stun anything our opponent has. We can also use it for speed pumping, and then back to our earlier discussion, you know, if we make them, after they like take their bad block on like and commit out to pass the block, on a future attack, being able to then flip and hit another foundation on top of that, because they're probably not going to pass that 7 willingly after they check to pass a block with their check hack by 2. This is like a really good card for Shigaraki. I think it's going to be actually like a big part of his core game plan. Let's just go through all of his symbols now, starting with Death. Let's start with Snack Time. So Snack Time, we're really here for the discard to give your attack a speed and stun 1. When we're drawing so many cards, being able to give a soft +2 speed between the stun and the actual speed bonus to all of our attacks means that we can just absolutely drive attacks home on long attack chains. We're going to have 10 or 11 cards in our hand, so even if we're playing like 4 or 5 attacks, we can reliably actually start pitching a card for every single attack that we play with Snack Time. At least once. If you have more than 1 Snack Time, that becomes less true. But when you're going for kill turns, the ability to just like use a spam foundation as effectively just +2 speed with a couple extra steps involved is very powerful. And again, as your opponent starts losing resources to all the stun, your own cards, trying to make blocks, the effect from Snack Time gets even more punishing, and it means that your enhance to draw a card based off a 5 check becomes even more likely. If you pair this with his first form, you practically can't fail. I mean, like, now they're going against essentially checking 6s, so they have to commit a lot of foundations no matter what they do. Very, very good card with this character on Death. Let's talk actions. Go for the win, I think, is a very promising action with this character. Again, this is one of those abilities that it's kind of a discard when you use it to destroy a foundation and ready 2 foundations if you're behind. Or, I'm sorry, you don't ready 2 foundations, you build 2. Correction. But this, you can still weaponize this as effectively just like readying 2 foundations with no real cost, because the discard doesn't punish us very much. We're going for these long attack chains. And then, of course, we can also use the response and just pump an attack speed to lethal if we can get it there. Very, very good card. Let's talk attacks. I think Twisting Asia Inferno is going to be a messed up attack with this character. I mean, Twisting Azure Inferno's in hand says that all of your opponent's checks get -1 for the rest of the turn. So that means that this will affect your in hands to draw cards, and it will also affect any random abilities that you have that force your opponent to make checks. In addition to all the just generally good stuff that Twisting Azure Inferno does. The only hard part about this is that our character doesn't pump damage, so you as a player are going to have to find ways to get Twisting Azure Inferno to that 7 damage mark. But if you can crack that puzzle, Inferno is already a snapped card, and it's going to be incredibly snapped in this character. Because attacks that don't count towards progressive pairs very nicely when our character just has a bunch of cards to play with. It makes all of our enhances more messed up. I think if we get even 1 or 2 ways to consistently make Azure Inferno, or someone figures out a way to make Azure Inferno consistently 7+ damage in this character, easy for like probably his best attack without even seeing his kit. All right, now let's talk about Evil. I think Evil has some very promising but a little unusual picks that you can do with this character. I think a lot of people are going to gravitate towards Death and Order for this character, but I wouldn't write Evil off quite yet. So Evil, let's talk foundations. In the Typhoon, this is a card that's been out since set 1, and it hasn't done anything. It's generally not a very good card. Remove a foundation, discard 2 cards for a free complete block is like a really bad exchange rate when you could like just use a 1 card and just pass the block for free. But in Shigaraki 3, when you have a bajillion cards because of his enhance, the cost to just discard 2 cards to get like a free block on anything regardless of its stats is barely a cost anymore. Like you could go into, I think realistically, once you're kind of like in full swing, you're gonna go into your opponent's turn with like 4 or 5 cards, and you're gonna draw another 1 or 2 when your opponent chooses not to check a 5. So discarding 2 cards to get a free block is like not a cost. So in Shiggy 3, this foundation, which is normally not very good, is literally just like remove, free block something with like no real cost. That's nuts. I think this is like killing this character on Evil. Between this, some of the other foundations you can play from Stain, and the cards like Dissolving the Conflict, I think killing this character on Evil is going to be a huge pain. And if you're looking to really solve the defensive part of this character's kit, Evil's where I would start. Speaking of Evil, let's talk about Evil Gaze. Evil Gaze costs us some health, gives us some foundation control, and a bit of speed hate or speed pump. Plays very nicely with what the rest of our character is doing. You could have also realistically talked about this card on Death, but I'm trying to keep this to, 1 of each of these per symbol. Again, losing a card for some speed and making our opponent either let the attack go through or destroying a foundation on top is a cost, and we still lose the health, but losing the card from our hand is just not the same when we're playing with this huge amount of card draw that our character has. So I think if you're playing this character on Evil or Death for that matter, I think Evil Gaze will be a very popular pick for this character. And finally, let's talk attacks with Blood Moon Rending. Blood Moon Rending is a attack weapon combo that makes our opponent discard a card if we discard a card. This is really not a reciprocal exchange since we get to look at their hand to pick what they discard, but it's even less of a reciprocal exchange when discarding a card for us is just not that big of a cost. Being able to, for effectively just like for free, look at our opponent's hand, remove their last block, maybe rip an attack out of it to stop them from being able to remove their only attempt at defending themselves against you, very powerful interaction. So I could totally see a weapon-based Evil Shigaraki 3 deck putting in some work. With that out of the way, let's look at the last symbol on Shigaraki 3, which is Order, which is actually not a symbol we've seen on Shigaraki before. Talking foundations, I think Final Exam Failures will be a really clean fit for Shigaraki if you want to play him on Order. The character roles are making our opponents make checks. Final Exam Failures makes our opponent make a check or they have to commit something. It's a very clean, simple fit. Just jives with what the character is doing. Moving on, talking actions, Engine Trouble. Now this is a card that is decent on its own, comes with a nice low block, but fits very nicely in Shigaraki's kit, specifically because, again, discarding a card, which effectively is what you have to do to play Engine Trouble, just is not really a cost on Shigaraki with all the cards that you're drawing. So I can totally see like a very control-based order deck, sniping foundations by using Engine Trouble to just disable their opponent from doing key things, turning off cards like One with Nature. Very powerful interaction. Then talking attacks. Honestly, I don't really have an attack in mind for Shigaraki for Order. It's like the one thing I really, at this early stage, don't have a strong opinion on. I think we're going to have to wait to see for the rest of his kit to see if something in the Order card pool materializes. I think he plays very well with a lot of the order foundations, but the attack lineups are a little weird with him. So we'll have to see what his actual kit and the other cards in League of Villains looks like. It's going to be very exciting to see the rest of the cards and see how this character shapes up. It's a character I'm very high on. I'll probably be playing him on Death to start, but I'm very open to the other symbols. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, and if you made it this far, consider liking and subscribing to the video. I'll see you in the next one, guys. Once again, thanks for entering the chamber.